Hello, and welcome to the EcoSend Podcast, a weekly podcast on becoming a climate-conscious business. Every week, we'll be interviewing founders, marketers, and leaders who are championing the climate. The podcast is hosted by myself, James Gill, co-founder and CEO of Go Squared, and the makers of EcoSend. If you run a business or are responsible for growing one, and you want to have a positive impact on the environment, then listen on. Every episode, our goal is for you to learn something and be inspired to take some action. Every single one of us making small changes and some large changes will add up. We're all in this together. So let's get on with the show. Thanks so much for listening. Now let's meet today's guest. Welcome to another episode of the EcoSend Podcast. This is the podcast from us at Go Squared, hosted by me, James, and it's all about us going on a journey to being a more climate conscious business. Each week, I'm speaking to other people who are leaders in some way on being more climate conscious, whether that's business leaders, people who know a lot about the climate, or people just trying to make the world a little bit better on the climate front in whatever way they're doing. And this week, I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Sanjay Lobo from OnHand, and really excited to have you on the show. Hi, Sanjay. How are you doing?
I'm really good. How about you?
I'm doing great, thanks. I was going to say a little bit about you, Sanjay, because I believe you have quite an incredible journey. From what I can tell, you trained as a solicitor initially, and then you were on the exec team at lastminute.com, and then Vistaprint, and doing some amazing stuff there. But now you're running OnHand. I was introduced to it as being the Uber for doing good. But if I was going to give you, I think the official summary would be the award-winning platform to encourage companies to have social impact, which sounds pretty cool. And also, you're a first for the podcast. You are the first person that I've spoken to, not just on the podcast, but ever, that's got an MBE for your services to older people. So I'm in awe already, and I feel humbled to have you on the show. So I don't know if you wanted to start off by just filling in any details that I might have missed there, but we'd love to know more about you yourself, if that's okay.
I'll do a quick background on me. So you're right, I started off as a lawyer like 20 odd years ago when I started work. And I was lucky that it wasn't intentional. I just stumbled across or was hired by a company that had kind of discovered the internet when it was kind of new and it was a new thing, right? So this is when Amazon didn't exist, Google didn't exist, but then they started. And I joined a law firm that had kind of like clicked onto this. The internet's going to be massive and we want to be the forefront leaders of it. And so got involved, I guess, in the e-commerce and technology world, very early stages as a lawyer, helps a lot of companies do funding rounds and that sort of stuff. And then went in-house at a certain point, joined a company called Travelocity, online travel agent, massive in the States. And they wanted to come to Europe and couldn't break in. They tried to break in themselves, couldn't do it, and ended up buying lastminute.com, which back in the 90s and the noughties was like, I guess, back then it was like Airbnb. And I was lucky. I got the opportunity to run the legal team over at lastminute.com. I was still in my 20s, very early, I guess really young to have that opportunity, which was ace. But after a bit, I guess it felt like I'd done tech law. It's like, well, where'd you go from something like that cooler brands running their legal team? And I jumped ship and I was on the exec board, which is great as well. It's just insight to an incredible talent. And that talent's gone on to do so many amazing things, people like Brent Holden, the new run Founders Factory, and absolutely. It was just cool to see them in action. And from there, I joined a smaller company. It was Vistaprint. They were growing. They're an online print company. They were growing really fast. And the speed they were growing at meant that anyone coming in who'd done some management, had some common sense about them, got asked to do many more things straight away. So I joined them as a lawyer, but then I think within 3 months, I was asked to figure out how to do a call center. How can we have a call center?
As you do.
Right. But build a call center for Vistaprint, it was like, that means go and find the land, design a building, build the building, and then fill in with like 200 to 300 people.
Wow.
So it's completely crazy. It's like, well, I'm a lawyer. What do you mean? And then, very quickly, I wasn't doing law anymore. I was doing various different things, but ran marketing for a while as well, which felt like a massive leap. But it was a journey.
You just whizzed through about 5 different careers there.
Yeah, right. It was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. Yeah. I left them to join a much smaller startup. 2017 just didn't work out. I massively clashed with the founder. I guess not unusual, but I left after 6 months. And then wasn't planning on doing too much else. I thought I could consult and enjoy my life and enjoy my kids and all that. But then OnHand came around. The idea at the time was, how do you connect local people who want to do good with an older person who needs some help, really basic help, like changing a light bulb or taking their bins out or getting a meal in, or just, basic companionship. Stuff that actually is really hard to match today because there's so much demand and not enough volunteers.
Yeah.
And the idea wasn't mine. It came out of an incubator with a bunch of charities who kind of thought, well, we've got it wrong on how we're recruiting volunteers. We make them go through so much training, and then they have to commit to the same time every week for 6 months, and then they volunteer. And no one's life works like that. Everyone's life is on demand, based on your location, and instant. Well, what if we could create an on-demand platform like Deliveroo, but it's not a takeaway you're browsing for, it's doing good in your local community. And that got me. It's like couldn't stop thinking about it, so joined up and started running that and making that real.
That's amazing. What a journey. That is incredible. I only came across OnHand. Well, we came across OnHand relatively recently, but it was from a very similar kind of sense of collective desire in the team to do more good things. We try to be good people generally, but we were finding you can have a lot of desire and hunger to do good things, but at the end of the day, it does come down to trying to organize yourself to get to places, or where do you even start? And when we came across OnHand, it took out so much of that laborious nonsense that gets in the way of the good deed you want to do. And I must confess, it's not a sponsored by OnHand podcast, this, but it might as well be, because I'm just such a big fan. So I guess, how long's OnHand be going then?
We started 2019, so we're almost... February 2019. So next year we get into our 5th year, which is really cool. It's been hard work, but to get into our 5th year, we're delighted.
That's incredible. So I guess with OnHand itself, it started with trying to connect older people with some help, but it's broadened out from there now, right? Like there's all sorts you can do, right? I mean, the last time I checked on the app, there's endless numbers of missions, both local, remote, and that's kind of partly led us onto the climate side of things too. What are the other things that people were helping out with on there?
We massively spread. So you're right. We started in older adult help our older neighbour. But as soon as we started working with businesses, and that arose during COVID, we used to be a B2C offering. Anyone could sign up and do good, which you still can, but it's a subscription model now. But businesses started approaching us to say, hey, we've sent all of our people home for lockdown. They're all remote or they're hybrid. Can you help us engage our employees? And that felt like a light bulb moment for us, because we've been struggling with our business model. It was, well, how do we actually make enough money to survive? We're charging someone like myself to get help for my dad, or charging my dad directly. And overnight with COVID, it was, okay, we're charging the wrong person, like literally the older person. Let's not do that. Let's charge the businesses that want to engage their employees. And that was a light bulb moment. But as soon as we started working with businesses, we realized, well, employees care about older adults, sure, but they also care about so many other issues that are going on: youth mentoring, climate crisis, clearly, homelessness, food poverty, all of the big things that are going on. So we have expanded massively into, I guess, the biggest issues that face society and the climate. So you can get youth mentoring, you can do eco cleans, you can do food drops to food banks, you can donate tech, clothing, various other things. There's work for schools. There's lots of ways to do societal good. And during 2021, we started thinking about, well, why are companies coming to us and wanting to do good? And essentially, it was all about impact. And as we had those kind of conversations with businesses, we realized, well, we already can't get that far in this conversation without climate coming up, right? Very squarely, if your company's trying to have impacts, yes, it wants to have local community goods. It probably wants to do lots of social good as much as it can, but it absolutely has to be doing something on climate. And so we thought we should expand into eco good as well. And, I guess there's the rise of ESG in the background, right? Environmental, social governance. So if we could address the E and the S in ESG and helping companies get their employees engaged in those, could that be a neat solution? And the first thing we did is we started planting trees, and we made that as a reward for doing good. So first time you did a mission on the app, hey, we'll plant a tree for you. And every 10 missions you did after that, we'd plant another tree. And very quickly, your company forest could grow. And I think the way we do it now is we'll plant a tree for every employee every month, in addition to rewarding employees for the good they do. So that was the first step. And then very quickly from there, we started thinking about, well, what if we can encourage employees using the app to actually change their lifestyle and change their behaviors slightly to be more eco-conscious and more sustainability focused? And I think there's lots of services that do that, just try and encourage that behavioral change. But what if we could actually show an employee what their CO2e reduction was by taking that action? And so most of the eco pledges we have on the app, so we've got a whole bunch of things you can do on the app, from, very simple, I'm going to use a reusable cup, to something that's more difficult. If you're going to go on holiday, don't take the plane, take a train. And you see the massive amount of CO2e reduction. Or change the way you eat. I'm not saying you have to go straight away to being a vegan. We have that mission on the app. But if we can encourage the meat eater just to swap out 2 meals a week, 2 meaty meals to a veggie meal, and show them the CO2e reduction, we thought that would be pretty neat too. So that's what we do now. And what we've seen is we get really good engagement, really good repeat rate, like 90% repeat, which is great.
Wow.
What we're now seeing is there's a lovely crossover between, if someone starts on social goods, almost 70% of them will cross over to do eco good, and vice versa. So we think a way of, I guess, influencing behavior, which then lends itself really nicely to getting people onto that climate journey. We haven't started it yet, but we also think about, well, what's step one? What's step one on that climate journey? And is it, the really basic? What's the coffee cup you use? Think about that. And how do we get you to step 5, which would be something like swapping out meaty meals for veggie ones? But what's step 10? What's step 10? And is that towards writing to your MPs and how you've already changed your pension, and perhaps even further, given the scenarios we're in?
Yeah, wow. It's actually fascinating hearing about it. From my background of working in software a lot, you talk about these user journeys, but when you're talking about a user journey for someone in the OnHand app, it's about changing behaviors that then all add up to being societal change, which is is an incredibly powerful thought, isn't it? That sort of small changes your team are making can have incredible consequences.
It absolutely gets us out of bed. And we only started the climate pledges. We started them this time last year, and we've done about 100 tons, over 100 tons of CO2 reduction in that time, which is cool. And, we feel like we've only just started that part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually in many ways, we've followed that similar kind of journey, I think, because I forget what we initially were trying to do, but we wanted to do something on being a better company, and OnHand was there to fulfill that. And I know a lot of the team, like I book in a call, I have every week a call with an elderly person who was feeling, the people list themselves as wanting to have some company, and I'm often the only person she might speak to on that given day. And that was certainly where I got started. And then for us, as we progressed, not only have we started changing our whole business and product and everything, but we as a team, we've started doing lots of social get-togethers that might previously have been like, let's go have lunch together, but now it's let's go have lunch, but also do something in the local area, and doing a litter pick, or doing all sorts of things like tidying up the local park or things like that, which I can totally see that crossover of you do one good thing, and then before you know it, you're making all these changes in other parts of your life you never would have thought about.
It feels good as well, right? Part of our ethos right from starting was we had this little slogan. It was do good, feel good, and there's something about that. We don't particularly push it as a selling point. There's a well-being aspect to it that's probably we don't speak about it enough.
I couldn't agree more actually on that. But it's hard enough getting people to sort of respond to an email, let alone go and change their behavior, right? What are the various things that have worked and maybe not worked on that front?
Yeah, right. So most companies that come to us, most of them already have something in place, like a volunteering policy. It's just not working. It's the policy in place. Maybe it's 1 or 2 days off that their staff can take, but they're getting an uptake that's like 5 to 10%. And that uptake is that low because first off, it's hard to find the opportunities. And if you do find the opportunity, and haven't arranged it and all that kind of stuff, typically, that group-based thing, it's like half a day or full day out of the office, really hard to do. And so I guess we approach it differently. The things you can do on the app at the most basic level could be like no time at all, like literally no time. An example of that would be we have food donations on the app as an action to take. And, most supermarkets these days have a donation point in the store. So if you're doing your own shopping, well, why not do a food donation at the same time? Literally 0 time. And then so we start off with, well, how do we take, it's called micro volunteering. How do you take the lowest time suck as possible to get someone started? And then we also have a bunch of talks on the app as well. 10-minute chat with, I don't know, the founder of Beam talking about homelessness and why he's got involved in homelessness and the amazing model he has. It's a 10-minute chat, which when you listen to it, you're really likely to want to take an action. Chat with the founder at Olio talking about food waste. You listen to that chat, you want to go and take some surplus food to a food bank, which, by the way, is another mission on the app. So very subtly get you involved very quickly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's worked very well for us is we've learned so much about how to launch into companies. And we would have done this with you, James, at GoSquare. We realized, well, we really need to talk to teams about what it is and get them involved. And we started doing that, and that was okay. And then we realized, well, what if we go in and we get people to download during that session?
Yeah.
And if we use QR codes, so they're just scanning things on their screens. And then if we not just get them to download, but accept that first mission. And it could be exactly those ones I talked about. Hey, don't worry about jumping in. Just listen to this talk, which we know will lead to a mission afterwards. If we can get people to download and accept a mission on the first launch, and ideally have that in a all-hands kind of team event, you get great traction straight away. Then we know most people come back and repeat. So the engagement piece from there should work really well.
Actually, incredible.
That's all that secret's out.
No, it's so, because I remember reading, from more the tech and startup side, I remember reading about companies like Stripe in the payment space, trying to get companies to adopt an API and change the way they accept payments and doing things that don't scale, or supposedly you're not worrying too much about the scalability. It's just to the point where you're going around to people saying, install this thing, I'll help you get it over the line. And I think that's something I love about what I experienced with the OnHand process. We're just going to get you over the line to start. And once you start, you'll see what it's like. And I think from what I realized, like, we've done these missions, I think as you were touching on it before, like doing good and feeling good. I almost feel a bit guilty about receiving any praise ever for doing any of the stuff on OnHand, because I feel so fulfilled when I have just, when we've done a litter pick and each of the teams got a bag full of litter that would have otherwise been sort of floating around, probably ending up in a river somewhere. Yeah. And it's just makes you feel, sure, you're holding a bag full of rubbish, but you feel great about it. And I think one of those things where as far as I can tell, no one's losing. It's rare in life where you have things where it's just win, 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 win for, OnHand's winning because they're achieving their mission. You as an individual are winning. The company that signed up is winning. The world, the planet is doing better as well. And it's just quite a beautiful thing, I think, on some level.
Yeah. And, it wasn't the original design, but it's worked out really nicely. And various factors came into it, like COVID driving businesses towards us. And that model then became really clear that could be a scalable model that, like you say, is a total win all round.
It's actually interesting now, isn't it? It's come up on so many conversations over the last year or so. COVID, as challenging as it was, forcing various things to change at such an unexpected rate. And for you folks, it sounds like it could have been, it sounds like it maybe was a difficult time, but one that forced some rethinking of the fundamentals.
Absolutely, forced massive changes to the business and made that switch from B2C to B2B really clear for us. There was an opportunity that I think for the first time we saw that this could be a scalable business and one that's sustaining. Yeah, huge change from COVID.
Yeah. I was going to say one of the other things on the employee engagement thing that I love is that there's an element of competitiveness to it too. After that call, I remember we had the OnHand onboarding call and it feels good about doing something good, but immediately it turned to, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to get more trees planted than you.
Yes,
it feels to that very hungry nature in each of us, I think.
Yeah, we're quite happy with the gamification because it's still version 1 of what we do on gamification. So I think there's much more we can do to keep up that competitive vibe. But yeah, it works. It seems to work really nicely.
I think it's a fascinating thing there where, I mean, for us, one of the things we feel is that there's so many approaches you can take as a tech business, as a software business, to gamify things, to influence behavior. And I think in many ways, so much of those things have been to make individuals more happy, successful, feel better, companies more successful. But something about the combination of the climate crisis that we need to tackle, there's so many extremely expensive ways that can be tackling that. But a lot of it comes down to individuals changing behavior, individuals raising awareness. And I just think that's such an interesting Venn diagram, whether it's competition, gamification, doing things that don't scale and triggering that behavior change. I'm curious as to how you maybe see that progressing in the future, maybe not just OnHand, but wider businesses. Are there any other businesses you see where it kind of caught your attention at all?
Yeah, absolutely. We look at a couple of other businesses a lot and admire a lot. Olio was one of our heroes from day one. How do you have a tech for good company that's so vastly engaging? I've lost count of what their user numbers are, but it's a number of million users now across the planet.
Olio is the food waste app, right?
That's it. Well, and actually, what's interesting about them is it's very much started as the food sharing app, and I think it's spread into more general sharing. So there's much more you can do on the app now, and I wonder if that'll be part of their journey. It's more of the sharing economy. Certainly got that massive focus on food, but we absolutely admire them, saw them as a leading light for tech food when we started. And another one that emerged for us and we found really interesting was ecology. And ecology plants a lot of trees, and they're planting millions a month, which is incredible. And you offset with them too. And I'm not convinced by offsets. Their model it's so engaging, and it's got so many users at this point, and their growth rate is just astronomical. And that can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
And so as I think of those as two leading lights that we look at for, I guess, engagement of people in communities, separating that from, there's COPs happening, you've got politicians and all that world leader stuff that's not quite taking the action we need. So how do you get the actions? And it's via the Olios and the ecologies, and hopefully OnHand playing a part in there too. And then I think for us, it's going back to that user journey we touched on before. So if we can get people interested enough in the topic that they take the actions, and those actions are building up, that feels like step one, great. And then if we can get them interested enough to understand enough about what's going on in climate change, I think most folks think it's complex and there is so much stuff out there. It's really hard to know where to start on educating yourself. And there's probably a ton of fake news that comes out of the big oil companies and all of that kind of stuff that's massively distracting and actually causes most folks to think it's complex. But really, it's not that complex. It's not that complex. It's that the planet's heats to a certain degree, it actually becomes unstoppable. And at that point, when it becomes unstoppable, I think someone else described it as we're toast. And it's literally true. It's as I'm going to go on a rant here, but as you get in the extremes of temperature change, you'll have uninhabitable parts of the planet, which means you'll have mass migration on a scale never seen before. You'll have a massive rise in xenophobia and racism because people will want to come to your country in massive volumes. That will lead to wars at a certain point. And then you layer on, you've got food shortages because of drought and all that kind of stuff. And at a certain point, that becomes unstoppable. It's the heating of the planet. You cannot control it after a certain point. And once you understand those points, then you kind of go, okay, I'll toast unless we do something about it. And that piece of education, that's the journey I'd love to get our users to, because it feels like, okay, we've got people able to engage on the app and they like engaging on that. It's great. And they know they like taking the actions that are available and societal good. It makes them feel great. That's great. Can we now take the step further to help on that education process?
Sure.
And the step beyond that would be, well, what are the not even radical, but slightly radical ideas beyond that, which would be, well, how proactive do you go with your politicians? And so forth. And hey, if we get to a scenario where we think even further action is needed, I do think it's a community movement that can really change what happens in the world.
Absolutely. It's incredibly inspiring, motivating to hear you talk that through, Sanjay, because if you could get people onto that journey, my understanding is that, there's so much we can do as individuals, but at some level, you need to influence the powers that be in the world. You need to influence the major corporations. You need to influence governments. And that doesn't happen with just one person standing outside and hoping for the best.
Well, I'm an optimist too. So I don't think the UK is doing enough. And clearly we've got COP going on, and politicians and PMs not attending or changing their mind about attending and all that. It gives you a slight inkling into what they're thinking. But other countries are doing stuff. France dropping out of a climate treaty that funds big oil recently. That's big. Stuff that's going on in the US is big. So I'm an optimist. There's changes afoot, and I think we can influence it more.
Yeah, and there's not much point being anything other than an optimist, I think, Sanjay. See, that's actually fascinating. I felt like we've almost whizzed through this episode already.
I talk fast.
No. It's absolutely incredible. I feel like anyone listening is going to want to hear more of you. Any parting thoughts in terms of any advice beyond all of the advice you've already shared for anyone? I think sometimes it can be hard to know where to start on this stuff. I've got one good idea of where you might recommend people go start their journey, but any suggestions there?
Yeah, I mean, you're pointing at OnHand, but yeah, absolutely. OnHand is a good place to start. And I would say that for anyone that's listening that can influence a business, our rates for getting a business involved are pretty low. But beyond that, there's on the education journey, the place I started was something like, and this is going to sound, to some folks, it will sound extreme, but the reading I did was Extinction Rebellion. And hey, they've been around for a while. I think media portrays them in a certain light, which, most people will think is out there a bit. But if you read their science, it's wow. It's backed by the most prestigious universities. It's backed by the IPC. It's backed by folks from NASA. The credentials they have for the science they write is incredible. And I say science, which may, again, put people off because people think science and stuff is complex. But they actually have, on their site, they have a very large white paper about climate change. And that is, I can't remember how many pages long, but it's very in-depth. But they have a summary document. It's a Word document you can download. It's just a few pages. And it really simplifies what's going on in the world and climate change and why it becomes unstoppable and what you can do to change stuff. And if I was going to recommend one action that listeners could take is, hey, go and have a look at that summary. Extinction Rebellion site, have a look at the summary on climate change on their site, on the science. And once you see the science, hey, it's really easy to start that kind of conversation with your friends, with your family, and certainly, stop folks who doubt that it's happening and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that would be my top tip.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Sanjay. I don't know what I'm going to do after this episode is finish recording. Thank you so much for sharing that. Great. And we'll link that, by the way, in the show notes for anyone listening. Is there anywhere anyone can go to if they want to learn more about you, Sanjay? I know we've got the Be OnHand website. beonhand.co.uk, I think, is the site, isn't it?
OnHand, the site's beonhands.co.uk.
Yeah.
We'll link into us so you can follow us on LinkedIn. We share a lot about what companies are getting up to on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
We also have lots of things that we try and promote on LinkedIn about the kind of campaigns that you can do for social good or climate stuff. And feel free to connect into me too on LinkedIn. Really happy to connect with folks there. And hey, one last thing, if anyone's listening and they'd like to hear more or think, their teams might be interested in hearing more, really happy to do these kind of talks in group settings. We talk a lot about societal change. We talk a lot about CRS and ESG, topics like climate change. Really happy to do those kind of talks for groups. Don't have to be a customer or anything like that. We love telling people about what we do and how to influence change.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Sanjay. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I think anyone listening is going to be inspired and motivated to go make a little change, no matter how small, in their own lives to make things a little bit better. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Sanjay. And thank you for listening to the podcast. We bring these out every week. That's the goal. If you've listened and you've enjoyed the show, please do give us a rating on whatever app store, podcast store you're listening through. It really helps us spread the word. As Sanjay mentioned, every single person making a small change, it all adds up.